Let's see. Alright, is this working? How do I know? I told it to start streaming. Let's see. Is it working? I don't know. It looks like it's working. Alright. Well, I'm not quite sure if this is working. My name is Samantha, and today we're going to be going over applique and talking about some of the different ways we can do it. And can anyone see me? Can you type in there? Let me know. This is can you tell this is my first time doing it? I'm doing it from a remote site instead of at Melco. So I'm just going to assume it's working. And, oh, I see a comment. Okay. I guess, alright, sorry for sounding a little bit foolish here. Not quite sure how all this all works. Well, welcome. So what I'm going to do today is go over some of applique, showing you some different ways to do it, talking about the different, whether you're going to use cutters to cut out your pieces, cutting in place. I'll show you how to set up the machines, and we'll kind of just go from there. So if you're not familiar with applique, how that works is, let me switch over to Design Shop, and I think, nope. Alright, one of these. There we go. Alright, so what I have, just to kind of talk about what the process is if you're not familiar with it, is we have, let's say we want to put something like this on here. So first off, what is applique for? You can do a lot of really creative projects if you're able to cut down on your sewing time by, instead of doing a whole area of fill, you change it out to be a piece of fabric in place. So let's say we have a bag here, and rather doing this background all as a solid fill, which would take quite a long time to sew, what we can do instead is treat it as an applique. So there's a whole bunch of ways we can do this. Of course, we'd first hoop our bag. Once we get it loaded, then you have kind of a choice depending on what equipment you have handy. Alright, so we'd start off by, let's say you don't have a cutter, you are just going to cut in place on the machine. So you don't have access to like a Roland or a Eye-Align, what other ones? There's a Silhouette, or I use a laser cutter personally. And what we'll do there is you'll lay down your fabric first. So let's say I've got some fabric, I'll lay it down, I'll hoop it, I'll put it on my machine, I'll set the machine up, and I'll run color 1. Okay, what that will give me now is a piece of fabric sewn down onto my bag. At that point, you go get your handy, scissors. If you can use the double curve scissors. My favorite thing to use is actually a modified seam ripper. So I take the seam ripper and break off the tip of it, and that way I can get close to the edge and just use the razor part of it to cut it and run the ball along the shirt underneath. So that's another way. A lot of people will use those little snippies. You can use just regular curved scissors. They actually make a scissor that has like a little duckbill end on it, which kind of helps push the lower fabric away so that you don't end up cutting it. So once you decide however you're going to cut it, you'll grab those and cut as close as you can to this line. Alright, so after you cut there, what you end up left with is some fabric sewn onto your bag. From here, you would run your next stitch, which of course I have in a color we can't see. So let's change it over to something that we can actually see. So we would run a tackle stitch, which is basically a satin stitch that is pretty wide open. The reason you wouldn't go straight into a satin stitch is when you go in that heavy and before you actually secure the fabric down nicely, it could end up shifting on you, and that's not a good look. So once you get it all, you hit start, you'll sew the zigzag around there. I usually put an applique stop at this point. That allows you to go and grab your little scissors, and if you have any flyaways, like let's say you didn't trim close enough and you notice a bump of fabric sticking out here, you can grab your scissors and trim it down some. Okay, from there you would then do any borders on it and whatever decorations you have. So we have borders and decorations. Alright, now That's if you're going to cut in place. Now, cutting in place is not the fastest way to do it, and you also can induce some risk to your item underneath, because if you end up nicking it with your scissors, well, now you just lost your piece because you cut what's underneath it. So another way you can run the same project is if you have, there's a bunch of ways, so let's look over at my table real quick. Control 2, I think. Oops. I'll figure it out. All right. So what we can do, a whole bunch of ways to be able to prep your fabrics ahead of time. So I have this pumpkin just as an example. All right. So this is actually 3 pieces of fabric. We've got this side piece. I happen to do it in the same, but it's designed so it can have 3 separate pieces of fabric, and the center fabric be a little bit different. Okay. It's similar to the one that Nate had with the larger pumpkin for that table runner that he did on the continuous hooping. So what we would do here is you can sew out on paper. So literally all I did is I hooped some paper and I sewed out my initial placement stitches, and then I cut close to it. What this will allow you to do is take your fabric, let's say I want to use my little llama here, and this is a knit. So one of the things you've got to do is keep in mind is how are you going to secure this onto your item, so that when you go to sew down, it's not shifting around. One of the worst things you can get in the habit of doing is sticking your hands into the machine. So let's say I've got my hoop here and I'm ready to put this piece on. And I just lay this here, kind of get it where I want, start running and it's moving around. That's not a good idea. All right. It never fails. Something will shift. You'll reach into it, and next thing you know, you have a needle through the hand. Don't do it. It's just not wise. So rather than that, if you pre-cut your pieces, sew it on paper, and then use products. There's a whole bunch of products on the market that you can use. Heat and Bond Light is one. That's actually what I used here. There's also things like Appliqué Magic by Madeira. It gives you the same thing. What this will do for you is you can just iron it on or heat press it onto the back of your fabric, and the Heat and Bond Light has this paper backing on it that I use to then take my pre-cut shape, lay it down, and trace it. Okay, well, now I've got something that I can cut out. When you cut that out, you end up with your shape sewn out, and now it's how are you going to secure it down to here, all right, so that it's safe and that you're not risking putting your hand in the machine while it's sewing. In those cases, you can use things like 505. Gunold makes one called K100. It's, there's an Elmer's product. They're all work about the same. And the key with these is there's a lot of overspray to them. When you go to spray, it gets everywhere. It makes everything sticky. You'll notice I use it a lot and I spray in the hoop. It makes your hoops gross. So it's kind of hard to tell here, but my hoops are filthy from it. It just picks up dirt. So I would, it's good to use, but keep in mind it does get everywhere. So when you're spraying it, don't spray it at the machines, on your machines. Take your hoop off, put it on a workspace. If you have like a cardboard box, you can put it in there. That way any overcast goes in your cardboard box rather than all over your workspace. But you would take your fabric and spritz it lightly. Okay, so this one. So if I take that and just a little bit, a little goes a long way. That will actually secure it down enough so that when you place it there, now it's held down. Grab yourself some chopsticks, sharpen them in a pencil sharpener, and that way when you're at the machine, if something starts moving, use your chopsticks and stick them in there to hold things down. Don't use your fingers. Okay? Yes, I've sewn myself. Don't do it. It hurts. It's not something I'm proud of. Another thing we can always do is, rather than using just a fabric and a spray adhesive to hold it down, which is if you're using Heat and Bond Light what you're likely to use, another option you have is to use stuff like Appliqué Magic, or I use this one. This is a product I buy from Twill USA. It's a sticky adhesive. It's not sticky now, but it's an adhesive that you bond to the back of the fabric. And once you bond that down, now you have a peel and stick material. And I mean, this stuff is aggressive. You can see it's sticking to me pretty aggressively there. So when you use that, this one's actually already treated with it. So you can actually peel this off And now it's completely sticky, so that when you go to place it down, again, you would place your fabric so that it's secured down nice and secure. It's not going to move around when the zigzag comes around to hold it in place. It's not going to move, which that's really what you want, is some way to cleanly cut the fabric, okay, whether you're going to cut it in the hoop or if you're going to pre-cut it and trace it, like something like that. Or you can use cutters like Silhouette or Graph Tack or any of those. I use a laser cutter for this, just because this is a this material here is a poly twill, and that allows me to get a really nice sealed edge on it, and then it's peel and stick. So I can peel that off and stick it down to what I'm doing. Okay, so oops. Once you have it all cut out, now it's about setting up your process to work. So I have a whole bunch of circles sewn out here, just so I don't, rather than make, my studio's loud, so rather than making a whole bunch of noise in here, I just ran them in this process you'd want. So if you've got a few options, if I'm going to place stuff that's pre-cut, I only need 3 steps to get the job done. If I'm going to be cutting in place, it look more like this, where I do a locator stitch. So I'd sew whatever my shape is, and then I grab a piece of fabric, lay it over that, preferably hold it down with something, not your fingers, secure it down, and once it's here, you'd go grab your whatever your cutting devices are, and you would trim as close as you can. Okay, so I'm sure I'm going to be in the way. I'm going to try. So like I said, I like using a seam ripper just because it's... Is my head in the way? Nope. Okay. So anyway, you can see you trim around it. Get as close to this as possible so that you can avoid having little... Let's see, there we go. If I hold still, hopefully it'll zoom in where you can actually see it. So you want to get close. You see some of this I've got pretty far away, but depending on how you have it digitized, it'll work out, because when your zigzag runs, it covers it up. Once you run your zigzag, I like to have an applique stop there. So if I've got little pieces of thread from my fabric sticking out, I can go clean them up. All right, and then you put your hoop back on and make it go. So how do you program the applique stops? Well, if you look at, oops, I gotta switch over. Let's see. Nope. There. All right. When we switch over to OS, this is what our setup that we have. Okay. Now, I'm using the advanced interface at the moment. I guess I can switch over and show you the simplified as well. But over here we have our color setup. When you go into your color sequence, setting up applique is actually pretty easy. You'll program your colors. You can see this is just a basic circle. Let me show you that design so you can actually see what it is. So I have it digitized as just a basic 4 steps. My first step is a walk normal. Okay, the walk normal is just a locator stitch, so I know where I'm going to put my fabric. All right. The second one is a duplicate of that same step, and I give it a, even though it's the same color, I give it a second color so that I have a place that I can put an applique stop down. With the applique stop, I sew color 1, make the machine stop. I can put the fabric down. Then I can run the zigzag. This is just a single line center element. All right, with the width, I'd put 27, anywhere from 25 to 30. I like on the higher side, so closer to 27 to 30 personally. Will get you the zigzag that secures the fabric. One thing you can also play around with is the settings on the single line. So if you go into your settings here, under single line, you'll see there's an option for custom, where you can have it split one way or the other. What this allows you to do is offset what direction your zigzag is. Is it more on the fabric or is it more off the fabric? If when you're trimming you find yourself cutting really close to the line, so much so that you're clipping the line as you go, which is okay. You're going to do a zigzag after it anyway. Well, you probably want your zigzag more on the fabric so you get a nice secure sew down rather than hanging more off. If it's hanging off, you might have the fabric fray out. That's prevented somewhat with products like the Heat and Bond Light or using the peel and stick. Those sort of products help avoid that, but if you have too little stitching on there, you can see some fray outs on your applique pieces. So once you do your zigzag, how you would change that then is adjust how far it's on or off. Usually 60-40 split seems to be pretty reasonable, where you've got enough on the fabric, enough off the fabric, so that when you go to trim it, you're not going to end up with having too little on the fabric but not getting a good coverage over there. All right, so that's just a basic single line. Then we have our cover stitch. Now, if you're going to do a tackle twill application, what is that? Think about the sports jerseys and uniforms where or maybe even a letterman where they've got the letter on one side that's just tacked down. Those are really fast to sew. You pre-cut your fabrics, you do a zigzag, and you're done. That's what is kind of referred to as tackle twill. It just relies on that zigzag border to hold down the fabric, because you're going to take it to a heat press anyway and bond it down. All right. So for the cover stitch, I have two on top of each other to puff it up more, but your outer layer is really the thickness of the satin is how well it's going to cover, and also how pretty it looks, I think. It's just personal preference. Anywhere from 40 to, I like 45 personally, 45, 46 for the width of the satin, because I just think it's pretty. And that will give you your satin stitch around your border. So those are the 4 steps I have here. So I've got my walk to locate it, a walk to hold the fabric down, my zigzag to secure the fabric right before I do any decoration, and then my final step would be my border. So if we pop back over to OS, again, how we set that up. So here, you can, all right, cancel. I'm in the middle of this because I want to show you the machine, so I can't step forward, so you have to remember the steps. My first one is a placement. So for that one, I just chose my color 6 is black, so I just picked black, which that's going to sew the first circle. By clicking on applique, so I did 6 applique. When it comes to that applique stop, the machine will stop, the hoop will advance out from there, and it waits for action. So now you can walk over to your machine, put the fabric down, and get it nice and secure, hands away, so you're not sewing your fingers, hit the start key. When that happens, the hoop will pull back under the machine, and then it's going to start. If you have a color change, it'll go to whatever color 2 is. Here we have color 2 is going back to needle 6, so it's just it's going to re-sew just like we saw in the design. It's going to re-sew that first stitch. All right. After that sews again. So I did 6 applique, 6 applique. When it gets to the word applique, the machine stops, the hoop pops out, and now it's waiting again. All right. Well, while it's waiting, then you go over there. If you're going to trim in place, you would trim it, hit start. Again, make sure your hands are out of the machine, hit start. It'll do the zigzag, and then the last stitch is my satin. So anytime you hit applique, the machine will stop and the hoop will advance out from under the needle case. If you don't want the hoop to advance out, you just want the machine to stop, you can use the hold feature. Okay, so rather than popping out, you put hold. The machine, as soon as it gets to the word hold, it just stops. When I'm doing applique, I like applique to use applique because it pulls it out, and sometimes I find myself trimming at the machine, which is fine if you can get around it. Sometimes it's easier just to pull the hoop off, throw it on the table and do it. Okay, so from there, I think you can see it. All right, I'm going to assume you can see it. So that is, this machine right here is my MT16, and I've already got the first step started. So when you go to run that, okay, I had that one stopped right before I had that one stopped right before the end so that you could see what happens. It'll say, hey, it's stopped for applique. It pops up a message on your screen. And if you can see, the hoop is actually out from behind there. If I pull the hoop, all right, if I pull the hoop, you can actually see I've got my circle sewn down. All right, so from here I would then grab my applique circle, switch cameras if I can. How do I do that? Control 2. Yeah. All right. So I would then do my peel. This is peel and stick. Hold it down, or use a 505 or something else. Basically, you want it not to move around. See, by using that, it's held down where it's not going anywhere. Okay, so it's safe. That's really the whole point of using an adhesive of some sort. I have seen people use painter's tape and things like that and sew through it and then peel it off afterwards. And that works, but it's, yeah. All right. So, put that back on my machine. Oh, goody. How do I switch back over? Alright, anyway, so that's pretty much how you go about setting it up. Applique will stop it and allow you to sew it. When you're doing your other pieces, I think it's this one. Oh, sorry, my hotkeys are confusing me. Nope. There we go. So when you're peeling and sticking things down here, you know, you get the same end result. Now, different ways you can cut out fabric. I didn't talk about that a whole lot, or prep your work. Again, you can use things like your, like a laser cutter. That's, like I said, I've taken to using that personally. If you have a silhouette, you can save off your designs to be able to use that. So here's an example where I actually just hooped my fabrics, and it's got the peel and stick on the back, so I didn't even bother using a backing. And I ran the die line for this pumpkin. All right, so what is a die line? Well, if you go look at Design Shop, and all right, so if we look at Design Shop here to create a die line for my pumpkin applique. So this, I used the actual applique tool to create it. All right, and you can see I've got the 2 steps there. From here, you can go File, Save Applique Outline, and save it out. I already have it saved, so I'll go ahead and open it. And you'll see here, I hope you guys, where is it? Pumpkin. All right, so when you save them, they pop into 3 pieces. I went ahead and just separated them so you could see the individual pieces here. Okay, so I've got my 3 pieces. Now, you can also save this out as an SVG or a DXF or whatever your cut files your software needs to be able to cut those pieces. When you cut those out, you'll set them up in whatever those programs are. If you're going to hoop and sew yourself, what you can then do is switch over. Nope. These hotkeys are going to kill me. So I just loaded that die line directly and sewed on here with white. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can see I cut out the previous ones. So I sewed it directly onto the fabric and then cut them out, and that's how I got this piece here. That's how I got that piece. I sewed it out, cut it, now I have my peel and stick. So that's one option. You do not need to, if you're going to use something this aggressive, this stabilized, you can just hoop it and go. And that kind of acts as its own backing. You can hoop regular old copy paper or a manila envelope and sew the same thing out, and that's how you get these little templates where you can trace things out, save off your SVGs, and pre-cut those. It saves you some time in the long run, because then all you have to do is, again, peel whatever it is that you're going to work on and stick it in place. And we're done. All right. So that's kind of the main steps to applique. It's very simple to do. Now, that circle example that I did already, if we switch, I can show you, let's digitize that from scratch. So I showed you all the steps just by turning things on and off. So why don't we just digitize it? I'm going to copy, well, I don't need to. So I'm going to start a new file. I'm going to pretend like I don't have Design Shop Pro Plus. All right. So if you don't have that, you don't have the Appliqué tool. So you have to digitize your own items. So whatever your shape is, I'm going to do a walk normal. That's my running stitch. I'll then switch over to the circle tool because I'm going to do a circle. If I didn't have a circle, if I was going to trace the pumpkin, I could just do that. So I would select my 2 points. I'm using the grid. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Shift. If I hold the Shift key down, it locks X and Y. So now I have a walk normal. The stitch length is 20. Anywhere from 20 to 25 usually is pretty reasonable to hold down applique stitches, what I find. I wouldn't go too much smaller with that. Alright, so once you have that, you can duplicate it. So I'm just going to right click on it, duplicate, and give it another color. This color change is what's going to allow me to have that applique stop. From here, again, actually, you guys aren't going to have change element type. So you would have to do digitize again. I'm going to do a single line. I'm going to change the type. Actually, you're not going to have tackle either. Sorry, I use Pro Plus, so I'm always having to remind myself what's not there. So if I use a single line center, stitch type satin, and again, do my circle input method right here. I can go click, click, hold my Shift key, hit enter. There's my single line. That's too narrow. I like it closer to 30. And we don't need it that dense. So a good density, something like a 17 will work. 17 to 25, anywhere in there. 20 works, so you can see it nicely. Alright, so now we have a zigzag. Now from here, now we need to do our cover stitch. So again, we're going to do a single line, circle. I'm going to choose my points, hold my Shift key to lock it, and again, give it another color. Make the width something bigger. It's a personal preference, whatever you like, and that'll give your satin stitch around there. For your underlays, always make sure you have good properties set when you're doing these sorts of things. If you're using the defaults for the new installs, they work really well, but kind of your bare minimum is you want to make sure you have some form of underlay. You don't need a lot, honestly, when you're doing this sort of thing, because if you think about applique, my first stitch is the same as a single line center. My second with the zigzag is going to be a zigzag stitch. So it's still a good idea to have some form of underlay for everything you're working on, for your top stitching particularly. Auto works really well. So if you're really unsure of what to use, try auto. I like it a lot. Pull compensation, that helps you fatten up, make the lines a little bit bolder. You know, it doesn't hurt. It makes, you know, embroidery shrinks just in the nature of it. You can prevent it with good hooping, with good underlay, but you still have to compensate for it somehow. So making sure you have a little bit of offset is not a bad practice to get in the habit of. And always make sure you have knots. There's nothing worse than having things come unraveled because you have all the knots off. Alright, so that's kind of your bare minimum. So from here, you have a design that will sew. Alright, that's building it from scratch. We have our locator. We have our sew down, which sews like the same as my rectangle that I had over there sewn down. I've got my zigzag and my center, my single line center. Now what if you've got Pro Plus? Well, instead of this, we could go straight to the applique tool. All right, the applique input method here. Again, choose my circle input. I'm going to choose my 2 points again. I chose different, oh well. Hold the Shift key, that locks it to a perfect circle. Left click, and now I have a 2-step applique. So now let's look at the properties that we have here. You can do some fun things if you're trying to mock up some designs. Not only can you use, you know, different applique fabrics where it's just simulating what the fabric looks like here, but you can also change it out to be graphics, which are kind of fun. So if you go look at your graphics, there's some built into the software. How you'd use these is, let's say you're going to scan in a particular, like that llama fabric I showed you. I could scan that in and put it here and never have to sew it out. You know, just as a, what is this going to look like? So that's just, it's fun. I usually just leave it as a solid color for simplicity. Okay, your tack down, that is going to be your zigzag stitch that holds the fabric secure. Here, if the width defaults to 30, you can do something else with it if you'd like. And again, your cover stitch. If you're not going to have a cover stitch, so if this is a tackle twill application where you're just going to leave it with a zigzag around, you'd want to turn that one off. Okay, I'm going to leave it on. And if you want a third color change after the zigzag stitch so that you clean up any loose threads, you would turn that on here. So you'll see there's a split of inside outside. What is that? Well, if you look over here, this placement line is showing you where the circle is that I input. So this is really showing you how far the fabric, your stitching is going to be on your fabric versus off. So if you are going to use pre-cut shapes, okay, those, or you're going to trace things and use these sorts of things to pre-cut your fabrics outside of the hoop, well, you could probably get away with something this close. If you're intending to cut in the hoop, this isn't going to work too well, because when you're cutting, you're not going to get close enough to that line so that the satin stitch actually covers up all the fabric, all the little bumps and imperfections of your cutting. So in those cases, you're going to want to change the split so your satin stitches go further over. So here, let's change this to like a 60-40 and a 60-40. So you'll see, you know, 60% of my stitching is on the fabric, 40% is hanging off. That, you know, most folks can, with just plain old scissors, get close enough to the line. Even if you nick that first little walk stitch a little bit, it's okay. It's not going to come off. You're going to go back over it with a zigzag anyway. Of course, you don't want to nick it the whole way around, but nicking it here and there is not going to cause you any issues. With your outline stitch, that's the first placement that's going to hold down your fabric. If you're going to cut in place, I like using a retrace. It's just a personal preference with a slight offset. That is basically going to trace your shape, go back over it. So you'll end up with 2 pieces of thread the whole way. Offset staggers your holes so that it's not in the same spot every time. And that's basically allowing you to, as you trim it, you don't have to, if you nick one thread, you still have all the others there. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to knit both pieces of thread all the way around. So it can give you a little bit more secure tack down of your fabric. Okay, now for the tack down step, I usually just accept the defaults and move along. For your cover stitch, you set your density to your preference. If you're not sure what you should be using, try auto. Again, auto works really nicely. And again, with underlay, it's a good idea to have some form of underlay. You don't need a whole lot, so if you just want to set a center walk and move along, that works. Pull comp, again, having a little bit of offset, not a bad practice to get in the habit of. And making sure you have knots. Always remember knots. Can you tell I've been burned by leaving knots off? So make sure you have knots. That's what's going to stop things from coming unraveled. Without those, it's just going to stick the top thread to the back and execute a trim. So now I have 2 threads hanging out on the back. Well, eventually they pull out. Next thing you know, everything's coming unraveled. Not a good look. All right. So here you'll see I have my 3 stitches, my 3 steps. I've got my placement, I've got my zigzag, and my cover stitch. From here, it's really easy to create my applique outline. All right, so I can save applique outline. I can go save it as an SVG, an EPS. I can save it as an OFM if I want to sew it like I did here. Okay, it's hard to see, but if you want to sew that there, you would then go ahead and save it as a OFM file. That way you can open it up and sew it. So applique is very simple to do. You can add a lot of creativity to what you're working. It reduces your stitch count. You know, doing a fill area, a large fill, one, it's difficult because things start moving. So you've got to really work on stabilization, make sure you have good underlay and all of that to get good coverage across it. Plus, you know, if you're sewing 90,000 stitches, it's going to take you a good hour and a half to sew it. Whereas if you switch it out to be more of a, let's see. if you switch it out to be more where you're going to put fabric down, so by doing that, you'll end up reducing your stitch count, and it's a neat little look. Like I said, I did this for a treat bag for a friend. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. I don't know if I'm able to answer any questions or see if there's anything. Oh yeah, my knots are high stitches. Alright, well, is there any questions? I mean, it's really pretty straightforward to run. Trying to think if I left anything off of my little stuff down here. The Appliqué Magic from Madeira, or this peel and stick. This is the Twill USA. I think it's 960 double-sided adhesive is what this is. It looks very strange. It's like this. You heat press it onto the back, and once you heat press it, press on this side. Now that leaves a liner that you can then peel straight off, and that stuff is crazy sticky. Okay, it does. So does this gum the needles? Somewhat, honestly. It's not enough that I use it a lot. It does. Yes, it gums my needles. Not enough to where I'm seeing thread breaks with it. So I don't consider it a problem. When they get really gummed up, I knock it down, but it hasn't caused me any problems yet. The Heat and Bond Light, if you're going to use things like this, there's also a product called Steam-A-Seam that you can. One of the benefits you get off of these is it really secures the fabric so that when you go to cut it, you don't have any fraying. Okay, so this right here is Heat and Bond Light. Again, I can trace on it, cut it out, but on top of that, it stops. This is a knit fabric, you can see over here. It's stretchy, but now with the stabilization on there of the Heat and Bond Light, that stuff doesn't move anymore. Okay, so when you're dealing with stretchy fabrics, you can still use these really fun little prints and not have to worry about whether it's going to move around while you're trying to sew it. Alright, so the thing with these, they don't stick. There is no adhesive to this. So if you're going to use these, you really have to use a product like 505. A little goes a long way. The stuff gets everywhere. So make sure, like I said, if you can get a box, lay your item down in, spritz it a little bit, you'll be better off, because it'll make your carpet sticky, it'll make everything sticky. Don't spray it at the machines. Okay? But once you use the Heat and Bond Light, you've got to go press it afterwards. Oh, I didn't show glitter flake. Yeah, sorry, I got stuff everywhere in my shop. So another fun way that you can do applique is, rather than using fabric, you can use all these fun. This one here is just a white glitter flake. I have prettier colors somewhere. Oh, there's another. Okay, so you can find all these heat transfer vinyls. And the heat transfer vinyl, if you're going to use this for applique fabric, it works just like that very first one. So how do I switch? Here, Control 2. Right, now that I made a complete mess of my thing here. So this first one, where I just laid a piece of fabric down over it, you can use vinyl. Any of these vinyls for it. When you do that, make sure you peel the carrier. Okay, if you can actually buy the heat transfer vinyls, less the carrier, but you want to make sure you peel the carrier off. I'll get a piece of it. Oops. I usually keep the carrier so I can use it later to cover it when I go to heat press it. And this one, again, you would secure it down, do something so it doesn't move around, and then you'd sew your circle, and you'd actually sew the entire design so that it's done with the square hanging out. Don't leave the carrier on it. All right, so when you do that, all that satin stitch around there ends up perforating the vinyl, so that when you're done, you can peel this away, and it'll leave. Be careful when you're peeling it. All those penetrations, yes, it cuts the outside, but it also cuts the inside. All right, so you'll peel it off, making sure you're just getting the outside, and that will leave you this where my black is. At that point, you would take it to your heat press and heat press it. That's really a fun technique for, the front of cheer uniforms, There's all kind, you know, even on kids' clothing, if you're going to do some of those fun little appliques, rather than using fabric, you can use heat transfer vinyl and not even worry about pre-cutting it. Just let it sew, peel it off when it's done. It leaves the vinyl there. Make sure you heat press it, just like you would with these. Make sure you iron it. I think these are designed for ironing, even though you can heat press it. The heat transfer vinyl, you would just follow whatever the steps are per the manufacturer of which one you decided to use. So not only can you use pretty much any quilter's cotton or any fabric, period. I mean, it's really the sky's the limit of what you want to use. I tend to use a whole lot of this type of stuff. It's filthy. These are, it's a polybacked, so it's got a heat sensitive adhesive on the back here, and it's just a poly twill. So this is good, again, if you're going to use for fabric base, for, you know, sports jerseys, pretty much anything. If you want to make patches, it's good material for patches. So you can get it in a gazillion colors from, there's several manufacturers that make it. And that's just another option you have for what fabrics you want to use. That vinyl also that twill also comes pre-laminated with a pressure-sensitive adhesive, so that you can go ahead and pre-cut it, or even cut it in place, and it has that sticky back to it, so you don't have to worry about, you know, using spray adhesives of any sort. So whether you're using that, or Elmer's makes one, K100, you know, there's a whole lot of them. So appliqué's fun. Everyone should use it. Yeah, very much spray very far away from your machine. It makes a big mess. I'm trying to think, is there anything I missed, guys? I'm by myself here, so I can't hear anything. I'm trying to think if I missed anything. So there's the biggest, again, setting up your machine. Oops, you can't see anything if I do that. Maybe that one? There. Okay, so again, you set up your color changes here. Anytime you have the word appliqué, that is a stop. That's your hold. It stops the machine, it pulls it out. You can see over there, it's out. So if I were to run this one now, oh, I can't run it with the screen open. Don't do that. All right, let's close that and try again. So again, it pulls it back. Okay. So that was step 2. Step 2 is just hold it down with a running stitch again. So that did not quite do the zigzag yet. Again, you'll see it tells me it stopped for an appliqué. If I were going to trim anything, I'd do that now. Okay, I did not put an appliqué stop, so I just hit the stop button and pulled it off so I could pull it and show it to you. It's not zooming very well. There's a zigzag right there. Can't see it. Anyway, that's a zigzag stitch, and if you can see, I did not actually put an appliqué stop, so I just hit the stop button and pulled the hoop. Alright. Anyway, that is appliqué. It's really simple. I know a lot of people are scared of it. Don't be scared of it. Try it. The only thing to be scared of, if you're going to be scared at all, is don't put your hand in the machine. Bad things happen. A friend of mine, Juliet, she had said to grab some chopsticks, sharpen them, use those. You can put a pair of chopsticks in the pencil sharpener, and when they're sharp, now you've got a point that when you touch down on the hoop, now you have fingers. If you sew through wood, can break a needle, but you're not going to go get stitches. I have numerous hand punctures. Don't do it. It's not, that's embarrassing to say, but just don't do it. It's not a good idea. So keep away from the machine. If have that handy, it never fails. If you don't use a peel and stick that's aggressive, if you use 505, or if you just decide you're going to go for it and lay some fabric down and go, yeah, it'll be all right, I'll hold it. You can do that, but it never fails. Something will move. You'll go, oh no, I can grab that quick, and now you have a needle in your hand. So that's the only thing to watch out for with applique. Other than that, it's simple, it's fun. You can add all kinds of different materials, whether it be, you know, heat transfer vinyls, which are just fun. You can get all kinds of them. Or, you know, just sew down whatever shape you want. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. My first time, yeah, don't sew your fingers. All right. I hope that was helpful for you guys, and I hope it worked. I can't tell until I'm done with here and see. And that's what I had. Nate or Scott, do I need to do anything, or just stop it? Who knows? All right. Well, I will talk to you guys next time. How do I get out of here? Oh.